Massachusetts bans Homer's Odyssey as schools across the country seek to eliminate the classics. Well, to be fair, your typical public school teacher is no longer intellectually capable or educationally prepared to read real books like the classics either. Turns out, after all, that warmed-over Marxist drivel really doesn't prepare you for a career in anything else but Antifa protesting or Democrat Party politics. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the emergency craziness now impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today, we start in Massachusetts, where the classics, such as the Odyssey and the Scarlet Letter, are being banned from classrooms by educators because the texts teach hate. What that means is the teachers, and I'm going to be very blunt with you here, we've reached the point where our school teachers are largely stupid. Their heads have been filled with ideology, with hatred for certain races, with anti-American socialist sentiment. They have not been trained in how to read. They have not been trained in order to contextualize great books. They're not capable of reading serious works of literature. And so they hate what scares them. They hate what they don't know. And they project their racism, their bigotry, their cowardice, and their ignorance on the greatest works of the Western canon, books that themselves sought to right the wrongs of discrimination and bigotry. Books like To Kill a Mockingbird, books like The Scarlet Letter, which were not pro-hostility, pro-anti-women. These were books that tried to square the circle in their own time to bring some sense of balance and perspective back that our highly educated college teachers, our highly educated high school teachers can't figure out for themselves. It is sad and pathetic. But I guess if schools are no longer schools, as we've said, they're bodegas of socialism. What you need is not teachers, educated, smart people. What you need is activist warriors. So what you're getting here is exactly what you would expect.
And so what's interesting, what's different between basically then and now when it comes to classics and people being upset about them is it used to be a parent or someone would complain about a book and say, oh, it should be banned. And then the school would be like, no, free speech, we're going to do this. Now what really turned is that the teachers are celebrating the banishment of books. The teachers, the ones who are supposed to be opening the minds to the students and letting them read, digest, think about, and then examine on their own whether what happened in the book is good or bad. No, they're celebrating banishments because then they don't have to read it either.
After this segment
is over. That's what's happening.
After this segment is over, you tell me if you don't think that some of these teachers would be absolutely pleased to attend a book burning.
Oh, although is it environmentally friendly?
Well,
this I don't know.
Good question.
So what we have the newest specific example here. There was an opinion piece that went out by Megan Cox Gordon for the Wall Street Journal. And she wrote about a sustained effort by critical theory ideologues, school teachers, and Twitter agitators to deny children access to literature. And that these activists object to classic texts, as we have been talking about, Homer's Odyssey, Nathaniel Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter, because they allege that these texts teach racism, sexism, ableism, anti-Semitism, and every other form, basically, of hate and ism.
Ableism. Because there aren't deformed or crippled people in the books. They are, by definition, engaging in ableism.
Or if they are, they're maybe not presented in the best light, like Jane Eyre. Then it's... Anyway... Moving on. So in this article, she actually had quoted a young adult novelist named Padma Venkatraman, who published in the School Library Journal, who has been published, I guess, in the School Library Journal, and she's claiming that challenging old classics is the literary equivalent of replacing statues of racist figures, exposing young people to stories in which racism, sexism, ableism, anti-Semitism, and other forms of hate are the norm may sow seeds of bias that can grow into indifference or prejudice.
And it's not like our friend Padma has an alternative motive here.
No.
She's a writer of young age novels, right?
Young adult novelist.
Guess what Padma wants? nuts. Get rid of the Scarlet Letter, a sincere and towering work of fiction, one of the great books of American history, and replace it with her book, which deals with trans-cycling, right? Or
trans-cycling?
Trans-cycling.
That's what you came up with? Trans-cycling?
It deals with disabled trans people who are riding retrofitted cycles.
You do not...
Padma is writing that book. So clearly in Padma's mind, as a minority and a woman and a novelist for kids, she thinks that she has so much more relevant to say than anything an artistic figure like Nathaniel Hawthorne could have said.
Yes, it's true. Well, Padma was not the only one quoted in this piece. A ninth grade English teacher named Heather Levine works for Lawrence Public Schools in Massachusetts, and she recently celebrated the fact that the Odyssey was removed from the school curriculum in response to a tweet calling the epic poem about Greek mythological hero Odysseus. If you haven't been watching this week, instant classic, Dr. Duke's been talking about Odysseus a lot. They called in this tweet Odysseus trash. And so this ninth grade English teacher is all like, woo, we don't have to teach the Odyssey anymore. Her actual tweet said, very proud to say, we got the Odyssey removed from the curriculum this year! Exclamation point.
Teachers, we got it removed. Teachers stripping books, removing access to books. Teachers who don't know how to read and think critically for themselves, who are products of indoctrinating seminaries of liberalism at the university level. They're the ones now bragging online that they have just removed these books.
And the sad truth is, again, I talk about this every single fall with the students I work with from various high schools in the area. What is on your docket to read this semester? What are you guys supposed to be doing? I don't know. We haven't read anything yet. From beginning September, I'm with them all the way through the end of November. I ask them every time I work with them. I say, what have you guys done in English class? One kid, it took him until at the very end of, it was mid-November. He said, Katie, guess what? We started our first book in November, and it's going to be the only book they read the entire year.
Unbelievable. But it gets even worse. As far as the Scarlet Letter goes, which is the Scarlet Letter is a book that really does call attention to puritanical values, right? It challenges puritanical ways of seeing sex and women and God and religion. It is actually a book that was shockingly progressive for its time. But now 150 years later, it's now backwards, right? And so this is the inability of these public school teachers, as poorly educated and as ignorant as they are, to be able to make distinguish these things. Gordon contacted Levine to confirm that the school banned the Odyssey, but was told her inquiry was invasive. How dare you ask us? We've just bragged about it, but how dare you ask us to comment? The English department chairman, Lawrence of Lawrence Public Schools, did not return Gurdon's multiple requests for comment. Seattle English teacher Evan Shin in 2018 tweeted that, quote, he'd rather die than teach the Scarlet Letter in class. And there it is. I don't mind saying it. I'd rather die than teach the Scarlet Letter, unless you are teaching about how to fight against misogyny and slut-shaming. Easy A is a good movie, though. Plus, Hawthorne wrote dope short stories.
Dope.
Literally. And by the way, listen to what he says. I would rather die than teach the Scarlet Letter, unless you were teaching how to fight against misogyny, which is exactly what Hawthorne was doing. He literally thinks, Evan Shin, that Hawthorne was a misogynist who was applauding the Puritans for persecuting Hester Prynne. He can't figure out that Hawthorne was actually critiquing this.
Well, hey, Evan is just a baritone blogger, as his Twitter handle says, a baritone blogger. But you know what, Hawthorne? Dope short stories. I think his attention span is about that long, so he needs those dope short stories. I think we can't read a full novel.
I think Dope Evan Shin should have been named after another body part.
Massachusetts. We like to talk about the once great state of Massachusetts. I don't think it's so great no more. Well, their legislature is all about creating new Title IX policies, but none of that has anything to do with what is just. Now, a bill is on its way to Governor Charlie Baker, and it would require the state's colleges and universities to consult with a multitude of stakeholders when crafting any new Title IX policies. But none of them would actually support those accused of sexual misconduct. So basically, they're saying consult all these people, but not the other people, possible to make it balanced and fair.
In other words, in Massachusetts, what they want to do is force colleges and public schools to talk to activists and women's groups and Planned Parenthood about how to punish men accused of sexual assault. But don't talk to lawyers about whether it's constitutional.
And they do include in this bill the actual list. In the list of potential groups include, it's not limited to, though, and that's where their whole law speak to get out of it. Not limited to institutional administrators, personnel affiliated with on-campus or off-campus health care centers. Mm-hmm. What did you just say? Planned Parenthood. Okay. Personnel affiliated with on-campus, when available, or local community-based rape crisis centers or domestic violence programs. Again, Planned Parenthood. Confidential resource providers, residence life staff, students, the Department of State Police, and the police department or district attorney having jurisdiction in the city or town in which the institution's primary campus is located. But in none of that verbiage did you hear anything about defense attorneys, civil liberties groups. None of that. We're just only these ones over here.
And why is the state of Massachusetts creating Title IX instruction when that's a federal program?
Well, hey, they were the oldest state constitution still around, so they think they're supreme.
Why not? Hey, when it's Title IX, you can't go too far left.
Yeah,
and so they're already doing it at the state level. So they're recreating their own Title IX, and what this is all about is we talked about at the end of last year, one of the great things that Betsy, one of the few things that you could point to and say, hey, Betsy did a great job there, is getting rid of the imbalance in due process, right? Mm-hmm. Under the Obama administration rewrote Title IX, amended it so that you could actually violate constitutional protections for young men accused of sexual assault. She actually fixed it, and now it's going to be broken again. Watch how fast now the progressives run back to persecuting young men in unconstitutional ways on college campuses.
Just a flip-flop, a flip-it. Yeah. Now, also in this bill, it prohibits direct cross-examination by accused students and limits the ability of advisors to ask questions, instead meaning that those accused will have little chance to directly question the evidence and witnesses against them. So if you're accused, you're getting the SOL treatment.
And what's also scary, too, is that I don't know what they're trying to do. If they're trying to the Title IX keeps coming up here in the story. Legislature is all about creating new Title IX policies. So that must be policies that are Title IX friendly, because the state of Massachusetts doesn't have the ability to rewrite or overwrite what's taking place with Title IX in D.C. I can only assume what they're doing is they're doubling down. They're not, rather than worrying about who's president and whether or not Betsy DeVos reinstates due process or Joe Biden takes it away, let's do it at the Massachusetts state level, where it doesn't matter what the feds say. If we want to hold boys to a different standard of justice, then we're going to do it.
Well, in case you didn't know, if you're white and a teacher, you're not actually essential, and you're not being allowed to get the coronavirus vaccine, at least according to the opinions of some. Now, New York Times' Jan Hoffman, she keeps tweeting all about COVID-19 and the vaccine and everything happening. And she decided to use some column inches to write about how old people and teachers shouldn't be getting it because they're too white, according to these experts that she interviewed and got their opinions. So this was before the CDC actually came out with their guidelines of like who's priority, who's going to get the first vaccines. And so this Jan Hoffman went and asked a panel who had their own opinions about who should be getting the vaccine. And the article was called "The Elderly versus Essential Workers. Who should get the coronavirus vaccine first?" And Hoffman and her co-author Abby Gnau wrote, "It's a question increasingly guided by concerns over the inequities laid bare by the pandemic, from disproportionately high rates of infection and death among poor people and people of color to disparate access to testing, childcare, and technology for online schooling." So here we go. Reverend William J. Barber II, the co-chairman of the Poor People's Campaign, said, "If we have to make the choice, we cannot once again leave poor and low-wealth essential workers to be last."
So only the essential workers who are black.
Yep, that's his opinion.
So essential workers who are black would get the vaccine, but not white ones.
And what do you claim is an essential worker?
Right.
See, okay.
So obviously, being black and a high school teacher would be essential because kids need black role models more than anything else.
Yeah.
But but the reason we don't want to we won't classify public school teachers as essential workers because they're too white.
Yeah, well, he didn't specifically say that, but we're working into the people who really. Now, you had Dr. Scott Gottlieb, who's the former FDA commissioner, and was saying, well, if your goal is to maximize preservation of human life, then you would bias the vaccine toward the old Americans. Okay, but
of all colors.
But I didn't see, they didn't specify white or not. If your goal is to reduce the rate of infection, well, then you would prioritize essential workers. So it depends what impact you're trying to achieve. That sounds like a very logical answer. Thank you, Dr. Scott. And now the CDC lists educators as essential workers. Okay, and Mark Lipsitch says, who's an infectious disease epidemiologist at Harvard, says that not so much if the goal is to reduce health inequities. Okay, so teachers.
Yes, that's
here's where it's coming. Teachers have middle-class salaries, are very often white, and they have college degrees. Of course, they should be treated better, but they are not among the most mistreated of workers. And the fact that you claim automatically, well, they're kind of white mostly.
That's the
they're
problem.
Very often white,
when
and they're
say
middle
that
class.
Their whiteness makes them.
And they have college degrees,
right.
so that
right. And what an incentive to education, right? Go get
college.
those college degree because once you got one, it makes you privileged. Right.
There you go.
Once you get a college degree, we can no longer treat you as a helpless minority.
But meanwhile, I'm pretty sure an infectious disease epidemiologist has a college degree. But then again, Anthony Fauci. Now, Elise Gould is a senior economist at the Economic Policy Institute. Elise disagreed. Teachers not only ensure that children don't fall further behind in their education, she said, but are also critical to the workforce at large. She says, when you talk about disproportionate impact and you're concerned about people getting back into the labor force, many are mothers, and they will have a harder time if their children don't have a reliable place to go. And if you think generally about people who have jobs where they can't telework, they are disproportionately black and brown. They'll have more of a challenge when childcare is an issue.
The load of assumptive BS.
Wow, there's a lot of it in there.
Of course, any bad job's going to have more black people.
Oh yeah,
of course.
Disproportionate.
I mean,
impact.
my God, if you're gonna be in a professional sports team, you're gonna likely.
I'm gonna look. Yeah, the NBA.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, geez.
I mean, gosh, can you imagine that?
Honestly,
it's the real people who should get the flu vaccines in the NBA are the highest paid players.
Of course, absolutely.
Because look, in a league that's mostly black, the dirty jobs are going to go to them, right?
Yeah, and then Harold Schmidt apparently hates old people and says that, well, first off, credentials are an expert in ethics and health policy at the University of Pennsylvania.
So he's not a doctor.
Exactly. Harold says you have to put essential workers ahead of the older adults, given their risks. Older adults have a lot of risk, but okay.
What is the risk? What is the risk of young people dying? Almost nothing. What risks are you talking about? The risks of death are significantly near zero for frontline defenders, unless they're sick and unhealthy. It should be working anyway.
But more importantly, they are disproportionately minorities.
Right.
So he says that older populations are whiter.
Wait, are you telling me that most nurses are black? Is that what you're trying to tell me? That most police officers and first responders are black. Remember when a lot of states made liquor store owners, liquor store cashiers, essential workers? That you could say, right?
No, they do. I mean, they do say like they had to keep open the liquor stores because of alcoholics and that.
But heaven help you if you point out that's where you're likely to see the disparity.
Well, yeah. And so anyway, Harold says instead of giving additional health benefits to those who already had more of them, the white people, we can start to level the playing field a bit.
And so, again, just like education ceases to be about actual education, healthcare is really, and this is the danger, Mom and Dad, for socialized medicine. Please, please, America, and all of you drooling liberal idiots who actually think socialized medicine is a good thing, look at what they're doing. They're using the COVID problem to socialize approaches to medicine. This isn't about the best for everybody. This isn't about helping those who are sick and dying. This is about how you use socially controlled medication to change the world the way you want it, not to address the healthcare needs of everybody. That's the danger. You want proof what socialist medicine does? Take a look at how COVID is being treated right now. Not as a disease, but as a disease that affects the disease who's racist. This is not a disease we all suffer from. And if you're white, you probably deserve it anyway. This is a disease that racistly goes after blacks and minorities. And in order to deal with this, we have to use the power of the state to transform how medicine is delivered. No more medicine to those who are most vulnerable and sick. Send it to those who are minorities because they have a rougher life. This is what happens with socialized medicine.
It's that special time for some real education. The Scarlet Letter, the A on your chest, is not only on your chest, it's a novel of historical fiction by the one and only Nathaniel Hawthorne, and it was published all the way back in 1850. Now, the novel is set in Puritan Massachusetts Bay Colony during 1642 to 1649. Long time ago. And it's a novel that tells the story of Hester Prynne. Now, she's a woman who conceives a daughter through an affair, and then she basically struggles throughout the whole novel to create a new life of repentance and dignity.
We saw earlier in the show how this idiot teacher by the name of Evan Shin in Seattle said he'd rather die than teach the Scarlet Letter, because the Scarlet Letter, he actually can't figure out. He's so poorly educated, typical for a modern teacher. He is so poorly educated and such a lousy reader, he doesn't realize that Hawthorne sympathizes with Hester, not the Puritans who have marked her with the Scarlet A. He is calling out the hypocrisy of religion, not participating in it. And so because of that, and because of his complete and utter ignorance, Evan Shin wants to see the book removed. The book is being removed from American classrooms. Well, let me show you what they're going to miss, these kids. Here's an example from the story of the Scarlet Letter, where after all this has happened, after they had this illicit affair, she was unmarried. Hester, she had a sexual affair with Arthur Dimmesdale. She became pregnant. The community branded her with a Scarlet A. She became a pariah and an outcast. After all this happened, later in the book, towards the end of the book, Arthur and Hester meet once more. And it's it's really a beautiful passage from the book about reflection and where they've gotten to be. Here's the actual text. It was no wonder that they thus questioned one another's actual and bodily existence. Was this really happening? And even doubted of their own. So strangely did they meet in the dim wood that it was like the first encounter in the world beyond the grave of the two spirits who had been intimately connected in their former life, but now stood coldly shuddering in mutual dread, as not yet familiar with their state, more wanted to the companionship of disembodied beings, each a ghost, and awe-stricken at their other ghost. They were awe-stricken likewise at themselves, because the crisis flung back to them their consciousness, and revealed to each heart its history and experience, as life never does, except at such breathless epochs. The soul beheld its features in the mirror of the passing moment. It was with fear and tremulously, and as it were by a slow, reluctant necessity, that Arthur Dimmesdale put forth his hand, chill as death, and touched the chill hand of Hester Prynne. The grasp, cold as it was, took away what was the dreariest in the interview. They now felt themselves, at last, inhabitants of the same sphere. And after all they suffered unjustly and persecutorially at the hands of the Puritans, they find and meet each other, and it brings back a reminder of what they were before they were used as exempla of punishment and sin, back to feeling as human beings again. And for the first time since the one time they made their mistake, they're not intimate again, but they're back to being human beings. That is an author terribly, terribly sympathetic, not for the sin of Arthur and Hester, but for their redemption from it, not for what they did, but for what they suffered for it. And to be a public school teacher of any stripe, Mr. Shin, and to miss that means it's time to turn in your license. You do not deserve the job you have.
All right, before we go, just a reminder, as I always say, the best way to keep up with our various shows here at Freedom Project is to follow us on Parler. We're much more active over there, and guess what? We're not censored. So just take 10 seconds and follow at Duke Pesta, at Katie, and at Freedom Project. Now, we want to take a moment, as we do, to show some love and appreciation for our Patriot Club members. And today, the shout-out is going to Joe from Bartlett, Illinois. So thank you for supporting us, Joe. And if you're a fan of this show, please consider a one-time tax-deductible donation to support the Patriot Club, and we're going to send you an awesome tumbler that you can be hydrated all year round with. Visit patriotclub.us to sign up. That's patriotclub.us. Now we're wrapping things up today with the fun fact of the day, and it's the Odyssey. It may actually have been inspired from the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is dated back to 2000 BCE in ancient Mesopotamia. So, of course, now we got to go even, further back in history and cancel that too.
BC, not BCE. You can stick that E where the sun don't shine. And that wraps up this show. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. Until next time, stay educated. Mes amis.